Ari Aster's Midsommar is often hailed as a masterclass in atmospheric horror. However, despite the stunning visuals and an intriguing premise, the film ultimately falters in delivering its thematic message. At its core, Midsommar is a breakup film wrapped in folk horror, but its attempt to convey emotional catharsis and personal liberation through bizarre cult rituals feels both shallow and misguided. Here's a detailed breakdown of where the film goes wrong. The film opens with a tragic sequence where Dani suffers the devastating loss of her entire family. This is supposed to set the emotional foundation for her journey, but the film does little to explore her grief beyond a superficial level. Instead, it relies on Florence Pugh's performance to convey what the script fails to flesh out. Dani's boyfriend, Christian, Jack Reynor, is introduced as an apathetic, distant partner, which sets up the trajectory of their strained relationship. However, both characters are flat archetypes. Dani is the emotionally fragile woman seeking solace, while Christian is the indifferent boyfriend we are supposed to hate. The lack of complexity in their relationship robs the film of any real emotional resonance. The viewer is guided to root for Dani's eventual liberation from Christian, but this arc is predictable and oversimplified. One of the most significant weaknesses of Midsommar is its heavy-handed symbolism. Ari Aster doesn't seem to trust the audience's intelligence to interpret the film's motifs, so he relentlessly hammers in visual cues and metaphors. From the constant imagery of flowers, representing fertility and rebirth, to the sun-drenched environment that contrasts with traditional dark horror, the symbols become repetitive and overbearing. The decision to shoot the film almost entirely in broad daylight was novel, but this stylistic choice fails to translate into deeper thematic meaning. The sunlit horror lacks the necessary tension because it becomes too focused on aesthetics rather than building suspense or dread. The Swedish commune, Haga, which is portrayed as the idyllic yet sinister cult, is a mishmash of various pagan and folk traditions. However, the film never delves into the cultural or historical significance of these rituals. Instead, it presents a shallow, exoticized version of paganism that feels more like a gimmick than a meaningful exploration of alternative belief systems. The rituals themselves, whether it's the gruesome suicide of the elders or the fertility dance, are disturbing but devoid of any deeper commentary on human nature, death, or community. The Haga members are portrayed as emotionless, almost robotic figures, which makes them more cartoonish than terrifying. Furthermore, Aster's decision to use Scandinavian culture as a backdrop for this macabre story can be seen as exploitative. Rather than treating the customs with respect or providing cultural insight, the film uses them as grotesque spectacles. There's a sense that the Swedish setting and pagan motifs were chosen for their aesthetic value alone, rather than as an integral part of the narrative's meaning. Ari Aster himself described Midsommar as a breakup movie, with the cult serving as the symbolic vehicle for Dani's emotional rebirth. However, this metaphor doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The dissolution of Dani and Christian's relationship is portrayed in such an extreme, exaggerated manner that it loses its grounding in reality. Christian's character is so cartoonishly terrible, emotionally unavailable, cowardly, and opportunistic that it feels manipulative. Aster forces the audience to side with Dani, but her ultimate triumph doesn't feel earned. She becomes a passive character who simply stumbles into her role as the May Queen, with the cult making decisions for her. The ending, where Dani smiles as Christian is burned alive in a bear suit, is meant to signify her liberation, but it feels hollow. Rather than a cathartic release of her trauma, the scene suggests that Dani has merely exchanged one toxic system for another. The film seems confused about whether it wants to criticize the cult or celebrate Dani's assimilation into it. This ambivalence makes the supposed emotional catharsis unconvincing. A breakup film should offer some insight into the emotional complexities of relationships, but Midsommar reduces it to an extreme and simplistic morality tale. Christian is bad. Dani deserves to be free. Clocking in at nearly 2.5 hours, Midsommar drags on unnecessarily. Many scenes, particularly those involving the commune's rituals, are drawn out to the point of tedium. While Aster clearly wanted to build a slow, methodical descent into madness, the result is a bloated narrative that overstays its welcome. There's no real escalation of tension. Instead, the film plods along with the same monotonous rhythm. By the time we reach the final act, the film has lost any sense of urgency or dread. Ari Aster's previous film, Hereditary, was praised for its slow-burn horror, but Midsommar fails to replicate that pacing effectively. The few moments of true horror, like the elder's suicide or Christian's grotesque fate, are more shocking than genuinely frightening. The lack of a coherent build-up to these moments robs them of their potential impact. Interestingly, the original script of Midsommar was supposed to feature a much more traditional horror plot, with a greater emphasis on the slasher elements and a clearer villain in the cult. Aster revised it to focus more on the emotional aspects, which arguably diluted the horror genre's effectiveness. Additionally, Midsommar takes clear inspiration from classic folk horror films like The Wicker Man, 1973, but it lacks the psychological complexity and philosophical undertones of its predecessor. While The Wicker Man explored themes of religious extremism and the clash between paganism and Christianity, Midsommar doesn't commit to any larger thematic exploration beyond its surface-level story of personal liberation. This makes the film feel derivative without adding anything new to the folk horror genre. It's undeniable that Midsommar is a visually striking film. The cinematography by Paweł Pogorzelski is gorgeous, with the bright pastoral setting juxtaposed against horrific acts of violence. The set design, particularly the attention to detail in the Horga commune, is impressive. Yet all this visual splendor is wasted on a narrative that lacks substance. Aster seems more concerned with crafting a series of arresting images than telling a compelling story. In the end, Midsommar is a hollow film wrapped in beautiful packaging. Midsommar is a film that promises much but delivers little. Its attempt to merge horror with emotional catharsis fails due to shallow character development, overbearing symbolism, and a confused thematic message. While the film excels in its visual presentation, it stumbles when it comes to creating a meaningful narrative or offering any genuine emotional depth. Ari Aster's exploration of grief and liberation through the lens of folk horror feels exploitative and superficial, leaving the viewer with a beautiful but ultimately empty experience.